We spend years on this chase. Downsize the divine into a personal genie, a celestial therapist hired to look after our earthly ambitions. Man, I'm so spiritually sensitive. The ego hijacks this sacred awakening impulse and puts itself in charge of the operation. Let's drop the metaphysics for a second and look at how modern physics explains this. Where is the main character? We need to find him right now. It's an engineered dead end. Look at the figure of Jesus. It's a heartbreaking paradox. A message about the non-existence of the I was hijacked to build a religion that structurally reinforces that very I. Boom! Right there, the ego has reached its absolute peak. The second you drop the frantic chase, you make a shocking discovery. And when that hits you, the struggle ends. There is a trap. A massive, invisible trap that almost every single person falls into the moment they start asking big questions about life, enlightenment, or God. We spend years on this chase. Years. We read books, we go to the retreats, we meditate until our legs go numb, trying to open our hearts or align with the universe. We feel like we're doing the heavy spiritual lifting. But it's actually like walking around your room in a frantic panic, using the flashlight on your smartphone to look for your smartphone. You're literally holding the light, getting stressed, completely missing the fact that the very tool you're using to search is the thing you're looking for. Or even better, it's like an actor on a movie set who gets so lost in his character that he starts running behind the camera, shaking the director and shouting, "Where is the main character? We need to find him right now." It sounds ridiculous, right? But this is exactly what we do. It's an exhausting, frantic loop. The paradox of the spiritual search is that you are desperately looking for the very thing that you already are. But why do we miss this? Because we've been deeply conditioned to believe that there is a distance to cover. We've been taught that there is a me, this small, separate, flawed human being who is lacking something. And then there is God or some higher power out there, somewhere in the distance. And we think our job is to build a bridge between the two. And we call this our spiritual path. But that's the ultimate paradox. The very idea that I need to find God is actually the ego's final, most brilliant hiding place. When you are in this mindset, you aren't getting any closer to what religions call the divine. You're just running in circles inside a mental labyrinth of your own making, and that labyrinth always leads to a dead end. Why? Because as long as you identify as a seeker, someone who is traveling somewhere trying to achieve something, you are actively creating separation. You are freezing yourself in a position of scarcity, a lesser trying to reach a greater. But if you look at the core realization of every mature tradition, whether it's the radical surrender in Sufism, the emptiness of Buddhism, the non-duality of Advaita or Christian mysticism, they all point to the exact same thing. There is no one to find, and there is nowhere to look. The moment you actually stop running, the second you drop the frantic chase, you make a shocking discovery. The very thing you've been sweating and crying to find is the one who's been looking. It's you. But until you realize that, you are a prisoner, caught in a very subtle, very sophisticated cage. And here's the kicker. The ego isn't just the prisoner in this cage. It's the one who built it, and it's the one holding the keys. So how do we get locked in? Let's look under the hood of human architecture and see how this mental prison is actually engineered. In the previous episodes, we talked about how human beings are essentially built like a three-story house. This framework is found in almost every mature spiritual tradition. You have the gross, the subtle, and the causal. Or if you want to keep it simple, the form, the energy, and the witness observing them both. Your mind, your ego, your memories, your entire personality, all of that lives strictly on the second floor. Eastern traditions call it the subtle body, The Greeks called it psyche, and mystics often refer to it as the soul. In reality, it functions as a buffer zone. It's a customized filter between pure consciousness and the physical world. It's the prism that bends the light. And the only thing that makes this soul feel separate or special is the ego. The ego is terrified to death of disappearing, so it takes this mental environment, wraps it in a beautiful shiny package, and spends its entire existence trying to save it, find it, or frantically worrying about losing it. But here is the first major pill you need to swallow. Your personality, with all its unique quirks, preferences, and childhood traumas, is not you. Think of your emotions as magnetic energy and your thoughts as electrical currents. Together they create a dense electromagnetic field, a cozy, tight little cocoon wrapped around your body. Everything you think of as myself is just spinning around inside this bubble. It never actually leaves the perimeter. And this is exactly where the ego lives. In fact, it cannot exist anywhere outside the boundaries of this cocoon. The ego isn't some mystical dark entity. It's just a bundle of rigid, hard-coded software. It's a collection of defense mechanisms, social conditioning, and survival reflexes. To put it simply, the ego is a mental construct. It's a tangled knot of thoughts and beliefs that got permanently stuck in your field after you lived through a specific experience. And once a thought gets stuck, it becomes a lens through which you view everything. For example, maybe when you were a kid, your parents constantly told you, you have to work hard and suffer to make a living. That thought got hardwired into your field. Now, as an adult, your mind unconsciously filters reality through that exact script. You actively look for and find proof that life is a brutal struggle. You get stuck in jobs that exhaust you, completely blind to any opportunities or clean breaks that contradict your childhood programming. Or say you went through a painful breakup and a new thought got stuck in your loop. Men cannot be trusted. Guess what happens next? You look at every partner through that heavy filter. You subconsciously attract people who will eventually betray you just to prove your software right, while remaining completely invisible to anyone who could actually love and respect you. That is exactly what the ego is. It's a tight knot of old thoughts forming a stubborn mental construct that traps you in a confirmation loop, constantly replacing the real world with its outdated commentary. Ultimately, your character and your so-called sacred values are nothing more than data from the past, written onto this field like files on a USB flash drive. But your true self, what mystics called the spirit, what Advaita calls Atman, and what Carl Jung called the self, extends far, far beyond the bubble. It is the consciousness that contains all bubbles, yours, mine, your neighbors, and all the empty space in between. So when you say, I'm afraid, or I want this, or I believe that, it's not your true self talking. It's just a line of code inside your specific mental field executing its script. Right in that moment, a file is fetched from your past experience folder, pasted over your present reality, and projected onto your future. But you are not the flash drive. You aren't the file, and you aren't the code. You are the space in which the computer is running. You are the awareness hosting the entire system, existing both inside the simulation and completely outside of it at the exact same time. But as long as you mistake yourself for the software, you are trapped in the cocoon. You look at the world through this heavily pixelated, distorted filter. You never actually see reality as it is, because your mind is constantly replacing what is with the commentary of what it thinks about it. And this brings us to the ultimate cosmic joke. At some point, that true consciousness within you begins to stir. It starts to wake up. And the moment it does, a deep, unexplainable longing hits you. You suddenly feel with every fiber of your being that there is something much bigger out there. But guess who feels that shift too? The ego. And it gets absolutely terrified, because for the ego, true awakening means one thing and one thing only: its own complete annihilation. It realizes it's about to lose its total control. So what does it do? It uses the oldest political strategy in the book. If you can't beat them, lead them. The ego swoops in, hijacks this sacred awakening impulse, and puts itself in charge of the operation. It turns your profound spiritual awakening into a structured, manageable spiritual search. Suddenly, the ego becomes an enthusiastic, straight-A spiritual student. It buys a ticket to a 10-day silent retreat, orders every book on enlightenment available on Amazon, and signs up for 3 different courses on energy healing. It starts waking up at 4 a.m. to meditate, buys a yoga mat, and fills the house with sage and crystals. It puts on a peaceful smile and proudly checks off its daily spiritual to-do list. It looks like massive progress, right? But here's the catch. The ego is deliberately running a search that it knows can never succeed. Because the only way this search can truly end is with the realization that the ego itself does not exist. Can software delete the computer it's running on? Can a prisoner escape a jail when the prisoner is the jail? Of course not. It's an engineered dead end. So let's look at the bizarre, brilliant mechanics of how the ego plays this game of hide and seek with itself, and how it keeps you running in circles. Because we're so used to over-identifying with this mental loop, we stay locked inside our customized bubble. And the moment you are trapped in there, you lose the ability to see the whole picture. You start chopping reality into separate pieces. Suddenly, a massive distance appears. On one side, there is me, the interpreter, the one who constantly judges and evaluates everything. On the other side, there is the other, whether that's God, enlightenment, or some ultimate spiritual goal you're desperately trying to reach. Let's look at an example that will probably feel deeply familiar. Remember those moments when you were sitting in total silence, breathing deeply, and out of nowhere you experienced a genuine breakthrough. A moment of pure stillness, clarity, or light. You felt this profound warmth, this beautiful sense of presence. It felt incredible. It felt safe in a world that often feels cold and chaotic. In that exact moment, your true awareness was simply witnessing reality as it is. But what happens next? Almost instantly, the ego interpreter wakes up, taps you on the shoulder and says, "Wow, look at us. We did it. We tuned in. Man, I'm so spiritually sensitive. I can finally feel him." And just like that, the ego takes that pure, unblemished silence and turns it into another piece of spiritual content to feed its own vanity. It completely hijacks the experience. Now the false distance is back. You have me, the spiritual superstar who successfully meditated, and God, whom I have supposedly reached. This is the ultimate dictatorship of the ego. As long as there is me who is begging, thanking, or trying to connect with something out there, the ego remains firmly in the captain's chair. It hasn't surrendered. It has just changed its outfit. It took off the business suit, put on the white linen robes of a spiritual seeker, and went right back to work. And it does this because it is terrifyingly easy to mistake our deepest psychological needs for actual spirituality. This is why we need to be radically honest with ourselves. For most people, a belief in an external God is just a psychological projection carried over from early childhood. We desperately want a benevolent cosmic father, someone who will protect us, give us a sense of purpose, and pat us on the head when the world gets scary. And look, This survival mechanism is great for coping with anxiety. But let's be clear, it has absolutely nothing to do with what the great mystics called awakening. It's just the interpreter finding the perfect, supreme ally to help manage its deepest, most existential fears. So, this is exactly how the ego creates and maintains the illusion of separation. But the trick doesn't stop there. It literally collapses your reality. And to see exactly how it does that, let's drop the metaphysics for a second and look at how modern physics explains this exact loop. In quantum mechanics, there's a fundamental principle that completely flipped science on its head. The nature of reality changes depending on how we look at it. They call it the observer effect. As long as pure consciousness, the actual witness, is simply looking at life without judging it, without labeling it, and without trying to own the experience, reality remains in a state of quantum superposition. It is an infinite field of pure potential. Everything is possible because there is no rigid ego standing there demanding it has to look exactly like this. In this state, life unfolds naturally, beautifully, and entirely without effort. But the moment the interpreter kicks in, a subtle act of violence occurs. To the ego, quantum superposition is a death sentence. It cannot survive in a world it doesn't control. It desperately needs reality to be predictable, hard-coded, and safe. It needs to know in advance who is right, who is wrong, and what's going to happen next. So the ego doesn't just observe, it dictates. It commands reality to conform to its own rigid, pre-written scripts. Think of consciousness as pure, unblemished light, and that mental emotional environment we call the soul as the prism through which the light passes. Ideally, that prism should be a transparent medium, clean, clear, and open. But when it gets clogged with inner clutter, with childhood trauma, unspoken resentments, the fear of rejection, or rigid dogmas, it turns into a dirty, muddy piece of glass. And as the light of consciousness passes through this mud, the image is inevitably distorted by the interpreter. The vastness of eternity is instantly collapsed into a narrow, suffocating corridor of your own concepts. You no longer see reality, you are just looking at a projection of your own pain. We look through this foggy filter and immediately start sorting life into neat little boxes. This is right, this is wrong, this is my path, this is not, this is from God, this is from the devil. The ego is so terrified of its own nothingness that it turns the entire universe into a mirror of its own anxieties. Let's look at how this cosmic collapse plays out in real life. Take your relationships, for example. If you carry a deep-seated fear of rejection, your internal interpreter will instantly collapse the infinite complexity of your partner's behavior into a single painful signal. I am not loved. You aren't actually interacting with a living, breathing human being anymore. You are just collecting evidence to prove your trauma right. You look at the endless depths of another being through the muddy glass of your fear, filtering out everything that contradicts your story. It's the exact same story with your career. You take an infinite wave of professional possibilities and collapse it into one miserable binary trap. I must be the absolute best or I am a complete nobody. Suddenly, constructive feedback isn't a tool for growth. It's an existential threat, a proof of your insufficiency. You lose total touch with reality because you're too busy defending a fragile mental construct. Even in spirituality, we live under this exact same dictatorship. We take the boundless mystery of existence and collapse it into a cheap transactional formula. If I meditate correctly, the universe will reward me with cash or fix my problems. We try to downsize the divine into a personal genie, a celestial therapist hired to look after our earthly ambitions. And this is where the interpreter celebrates its ultimate triumph. It convinces you that the observer is this small, terrified, separate me. It makes you believe that God is some distant, external sun out there, and that your job is to catch its rays through the right prayers, techniques, or rituals. But you cannot see the sun if you refuse to wipe down the glass. The problem has never been with God, and it has never been with the world. The problem is with the interpreter. You don't see the divine not because it's hiding, but because you are still staring at the world through the heavily pixelated filter of your own personality. And here's the most fascinating part. This isn't some trendy modern psychological theory. It is the exact realization that every mature spiritual tradition stumbled upon thousands of years ago. If you take a walk through the historical libraries of world's great mystical teachings, you'll notice something strange. On the surface, everything looks completely different. The names of the gods, the rituals, the cultural dogmas, they seem miles apart. But the moment you strip away the outer layers, the moment you move past the institutional noise and get to the raw core of what the true masters were pointing to, you run into a shocking, undeniable consensus. Look at the Christian mystic Meister Eckhart back in the 14th century. He completely blindsided the church establishment when he boldly declared, "The eye with which I see God is the exact same eye with which God sees me." Let that sink in. There are no two separate glances. There is no you standing over here, staring at a distant him over there. There is only one single unbroken process of awareness. In Advaita Vedanta, they put it even more bluntly. Atman is Brahman. Your ultimate innermost self is identical to the absolute ground of all existence. Once you truly realize this, the entire concept of a path to God becomes laughable. How can the ocean travel toward its own wave? How can life go out to search for life? Even in Sufism, where the relationship with the divine is often painted in colors of agonizing, passionate longing, Rumi dropped this beautiful truth. That ache you feel in your chest is not your longing for God. That is the divine within you longing for itself. So what is the common denominator here? Every single one of these traditions points to the exact same thing. Awakening is never about acquiring some new shiny quality. It is simply the collapse of the illusion of separation. But we love to treat spirituality like a corporate ladder. We think, if I just purify my soul, if I become a nicer person, if I tick off all the right rituals, then and only then will I finally earn the divine presence. But let's call it what it is. That's just the internal interpreter trying to run a spiritual transaction. It's trying to bribe God. The mature traditions tell us a completely different story. The path isn't a journey toward a destination. It's not about adding anything to yourself. It's a process of radical subtraction. It's the gentle, painful stripping away of all that inner clutter we talked about. The concepts, the rules, the social masks, and the old childhood wounds. The second you stop resisting what is, the moment you drop the exhausting hustle to become spiritual and just allow consciousness to experience life through your biological machinery, the real shift happens. You finally realize you aren't traveling to God. You are the expression of the very consciousness that is currently experiencing this body. You aren't some tool in the hands of the divine. You are the divine itself, which temporarily chose to forget its true nature just to play this weird, tragicomic game of being a human running around in the dark, frantically searching for the keys to their own home, standing right on the doorstep. And when that hits you, the struggle ends. You don't need to perform, and you don't need to get it right just to make God notice you. You are His attention. You are His eyes, His ears, and his capacity to feel the weight of this world. But here is the ultimate plot twist. The biggest obstacle to this profound, quiet realization is often the very thing we proudly call our spiritual work. We are deeply addicted to feeling spiritual because it makes us feel incredibly good in our own eyes. It's the ultimate validation. But let's strip away the romance and look at what most of our spiritual work actually looks like under the hood. Look at the classic scenario. You've convinced yourself that if you start every single morning with meditation, daily affirmations, or lighting a specific stick of incense, you are officially aligned, in flow, and connected. But let's look closer at the mechanics of what happens when your life gets in the way. What happens when you are running late or just too exhausted and you have to skip your routine? Suddenly, a wave of anxiety hits you. You feel guilty. You start snapping at the people around you because your day is ruined. That isn't spirituality. That's an addiction. Your sacred ritual has become an armor, another external security blanket that your internal interpreter uses to feel like it's in control of reality. If your connection to the universe completely shatters just because you missed a 5-minute quiet session, you weren't connected to God. You were just hooked on your own routine. Another classic scenario. You work hard on yourself. You radiate positivity, you master the vocabulary of compassion, and you actively cut out toxic people and heavy conversations. But what do you do when anger, jealousy, or raw fury inevitably bubble up inside you? You quickly release it, process it, or show it down beneath a thick layer of high vibrations. This is the most dangerous trap of all. You build a flawless spiritual facade, but behind it hides a terrified child who is simply not allowed to be human. This isn't cleaning your inner prism. This is psychological suppression. Your spirituality has become nothing more than heavy makeup, a cosmetic layer you slap on your face so you don't have to look at your own shadow. And then you hit the ultimate scenario, the trap of spiritual arrogance. It usually sneaks in the moment you first catch a glimpse of a deeper reality. You read all the right books, you intellectualize the concepts of non-duality, you master all the correct enlightened buzzwords. And then, out of nowhere, you look down at the world and catch yourself thinking, wow, now I understand how the universe works, but look at these people around me, they're so hopelessly asleep. Communicating with them is beneath me now. Boom! Right there, the ego has reached its absolute peak. It has taken your profound insights and weaponized them to feed its own sense of superiority. It has successfully turned your search into an exclusive VIP country club where you are a privileged member. At this moment, you didn't get any closer to the divine. You just built a higher, thicker wall made of spiritual concepts to protect yourself from actual, messy, unpredictable life. Why is it so critical to see this? Because as long as your spirituality gives you a sense of superiority, comfort, or control, it is still the ego. It has just found a highly sophisticated, deeply disguised way to validate itself. Because true awakening isn't a project of self-improvement. It is not about collecting spiritual badges of honor. It is the total, brutal exposure of every single illusion and story you have ever invented about yourself. It's the moment you no longer need to be spiritual just to feel worthy of existence. It's the moment you finally surrender to your own truth. No matter how ugly, raw, or uncomfortable that truth turns out to be. And now, let's make the hardest transition of all, the one that makes most people want to run away, right back into the cozy, safe embrace of their spiritual illusions. Why are we so utterly terrified to admit that God is not a person sitting on a throne in the clouds, but the very essence of the one listening to this right now. Because admitting that means admitting that there is no one left to blame. There is no one left to hand over the responsibility for your life to. As long as you are praying to someone out there, as long as you are begging the universe or pleading with angels for help, you are playing a very old, very safe game. I am tiny and he is big. And look, that game brings massive psychological relief. It allows you to feel like a protected child being watched over by a loving parent. It is incredibly comfortable, but it completely blocks reality itself. Now, don't get me wrong, tools like prayer or meditation are brilliant instruments for cleaning and tuning that mental emotional prism through which consciousness projects itself into the world. It's an honest attempt to wipe down the glass. But if you perform these practices purely as a mechanical routine without understanding the core, a profound deception takes place. Your prayer stops being in alignment with consciousness and turns into a shelter where the ego hides from the silence. It becomes an escape from the terrifying realization that no one is coming to save you. Because you are the one who holds the fullness of the power. Instead of cleaning the prism, you're just decorating it with shiny new rituals to mask your fear of being left utterly alone with the void. Look at the figure of Jesus. The entire essence of his path wasn't the triumph of a personality. It was its radical, total annihilation. The crucifixion is the ultimate symbol of the final, most agonizing step, the complete surrender of the separate self, the letting go of any claim to individual existence. He demonstrated what happens when a human being completely surrenders to consciousness, leaving absolutely zero personal interest, not a single drop of ego. On that cross, it wasn't just a physical body dying. It was the mental construct of the I, the very same one we spent our entire lives identifying with, that was being crucified. But society took this explosive message and turned it into a comfortable idolatry. Instead of seeing the cross as a call to the death of their own egos, people turned Jesus into a supreme external entity to be worshipped. They manufactured the perfect savior who is supposed to return, redeem their sins, forgive them, and take them away to a better world. They turned him into an object, dressing him in traits that actually feed and pamper our own egos. We project onto Jesus everything we lack: absolute safety, unconditional love, and the permission to remain passive. The Savior Jesus is just a giant projection of our collective terror of reality. The ego, horrified by its own mortality, paints a cosmic parent in disguise who is obligated to fix everything. And as long as you keep praying to your Savior, you are simply preserving your own helplessness. You are artificially extending the life of a self that is too terrified of the quiet. It's a heartbreaking paradox. A message about the non-existence of the I was hijacked to build a religion that structurally reinforces that very I. This is the deepest layer of self-deception, using the path of someone who completely dissolved his personality to feed and fatten your own. It is a direct violation of the ancient commandment, do not make for yourself an idol. Yet the blind spot of the ego keeps this hidden from us. Jesus on the cross isn't about someone else suffering for you. It's a raw demonstration of what it looks like when there is a total absence of an I, when there is absolutely nothing left to lose. True awakening begins exactly where your spiritual project to save your own soul falls apart. It begins when you finally dare to stand face to face with the void, a space where there is no you, the tiny seeker, and no God, the external observer. All that remains is pure pulsing life, and it no longer needs your maps, your rituals, or your intellectual explanations. You aren't building a path, you are the terrain. The moment you stop manipulating reality to become spiritual, the noise dies down, and you just are. And it's right here, in this absolute stillness, that the true nature of unconditional love becomes obvious. The kind of love that everyone talks about, everyone chases, but almost no one has actually tasted. We throw the words unconditional love around so casually, but the truth is, most of us have never experienced it. We constantly mistake passion or the need for security, or the hunger for validation, or the urge to fix another person for love. But real, unconditional love isn't an emotional high or a dopamine rush. It is presence. It is the rare, quiet capacity to simply sit with another human being's experience exactly as it is, without trying to change it, without trying to fix it, without projecting your expectations, and without passing judgment. It is the rarest, most sacred gift one human being can give to another. But why are we so catastrophically incapable of giving this to others? Because we don't know how to give it to ourselves. Most people live in a state of continuous brutal inner warfare. You criticize your every move, suppress emotions you deem inappropriate, and force your body to conform to standards that have absolutely nothing to do with your unique nature. We treat ourselves like merciless prison wardens, constantly policing our own raw experience. How can you possibly be present for someone else's experience if you refuse to be present for your own? If you are constantly obsessed with fixing your life, improving your feelings, and dragging yourself towards some artificial ideal, you aren't present. You are just locked in an endless, exhausting fight. Unconditional love doesn't start with holy prayers, and it definitely doesn't start with trying to force yourself to love your neighbor. It starts when you finally, mercifully, leave yourself alone. It's the exact moment you allow yourself to feel anger, pain, fear, or total exhaustion, and you don't immediately rush to fix it. You simply let it be, realizing that all of it is just a passing current flowing through you. The second you learn to sit with your own experience without judgment, love stops being a lofty spiritual concept. It becomes your natural default state, and only then can you truly see another human being without the distorted filters of the ego. You will no longer try to fix them or use them to fill your own emptiness. You will simply be present for their journey. And that is the ultimate definition of what we call the divine presence. In the end, the entire tragicomic drama of so-called spiritual path boils down to one simple, breathtaking realization. You are not the traveler walking down the road. You are the road. You are the territory. And you are the movement itself. The moment you finally stop trying to become spiritual, the moment you drop all your visualizations, your mantras, and your exhausting attempts to earn enlightenment, something strange and terrifying happens. The noise inside your head suddenly dies down. And in that profound silence, you see it with absolute clarity. Everything you've been chasing for years, the peace, the answers, the very presence of God, was already your fundamental nature. You discover that you are not that tiny, fragile I desperately searching for enlightenment. You are the boundless consciousness itself, which once decided to play a game called a human being looking for the keys to happiness. This game was intense, it was thrilling, and at times it was deeply painful. But it was always, from the very beginning, just a game. The second you realize this, the second you feel it deeply, right down to your bones, the search instantly ends. The seeker dissolves, and the destination disappears. All that remains is pure, unfiltered life. There is nowhere left to arrive. There is nothing left to improve. There is no one left to become. You just are. And in this ultimate naked simplicity, you will finally recognize the one you've been calling God for so long. You will recognize that presence because you will be looking at it through your very own eyes. And just like that, you've made it home without taking a single step.